The final pasuk of Arami Ovid Avi, the fourth pasuk, having already described the descent, Yaakov descends into Mitzrayim, submits to Jewish history, to Jewish fate. Anos al pi hadibur, he sees prophetically that though this may be inconvenient or even taxing on a personal level, this is necessary to propel Jewish history, to introduce Egypt, and through Egypt the entire world, to the notion of monotheism, a God you couldn't see, a God you couldn't understand. And he submits and descends. The second pasuk, a gradual evolutionary persecution and discrimination, a slow defamation of the Jewish people, which yields hatred, anti-Semitism, genocide. Third pasuk, Am Yisrael recovers. They daven. It's a immature davening. It's not the fervent frontal petition that we would expect, type of davening that Am Yisrael ultimately grows into when they suffer the same peril hundreds of years later in the reign of Achashverosh and Haman in Persia during the miracle of Purim. But it is nonetheless a tefillah. They do see themselves as participating in the great chapter and the great challenge of Jewish history, and their moans and their suffering God treats as a form of tefillah. And now the third pasuk describes why HaKadosh Baruch Hu redeemed us. We may not have been deserving. Vayishma Hashem es koleinu. God heard our voices. God remembered the covenant with the Avos, challenge of Jewish history, the submission of Yaakov to Jewish history, Arami Ovid Avi. He also saw that despite our unsuitability for redemption, the horror by which the Egyptians treated Jewish children, the interference with Jewish family life, so the final pasuk of Arami Ovid Avi describes the Geula, describes the redemption. V'yotzeinu Hashem Elokeinu misham, biyad chazaka, v'zra netuya, uv'mara gadol, uv'yasos, uv'mofsim. Ravon Shalom redeemed us with a strong hand, an outstretched arm, zra netuya, uv'mara gadol, a great appearance, uv'yasos, with signs, uv'moftim, with omens. The third part, or actually the fourth part of this series of 5, Bi'osos Zehamata. Why is the Mata so important? Why is it such a crucial part of Yitzias Mitzrayim that we spotlight it? Bi'osos Zehamata, and the pasuk in Kisavo spotlights Osos, and the Baal Hagadah interprets the word Osos as a reference to the Mata, because when HaKadosh Baruch Hu delivered the Mata to Moshe, told him, Hinei Mata zeh tikach bi'yadecha, asher ta'aseh bo es osos. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu actually instructs Moshe to perform osos with a mata. Since he's performing osos with a mata, so the term osos in Parshas Kisavo is a code or a hint to the mata. So first of all, the mata is important because it serves to decentralize Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu's name doesn't appear in the Haggadah. Tonight is the night for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In the beginning of the pasuk, pretty much implores that. V'yotzeinu Hashem Elokeinu misham. Of course, HaKadosh Baruch Hu redeemed us. HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the pasuk before had heard our tefillos. Vayishma Hashem es koleinu, vayaros anyenu, v'esam aleinu, v'slachatzeinu. So the term V'yotzeinu Hashem in the final pasuk is redundant. Of course, Hashem is the redeemer, is the liberator. He's the one listening to the tefillos. And yet, the fourth pasuk in Arami Ovid Avi stresses Vayotzeinu Hashem Elokeinu misham, and the hagadah, as we all know, interprets it in a very, very roundabout but consistent fashion. V'yotzeinu Hashem Elokeinu misham. Each pasuk is meant to highlight the personal involvement of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the chavoda uviatzmo, quoting psukim from Parshas Bo, v'avarti be'eretz Mitzrayim b'layla zeh, v'kesi kol b'chor, and as the Haggadah darshans, ani v'lo shliach, ani v'lo saraf. So this was HaKadosh Baruch Hu's direct intervention to punish the Egyptians, to embarrass or humiliate the Egyptian idols and pagan gods, because this was, as I mentioned, one of the most important salvos in the triumph of monotheism. We take it for granted. We live in a world of reason and of ration, of science, and of monotheism. But 2,000 years ago, the world was a very different place, and it was a world infested and infected with paganism, pagan rituals, black magic, and Mitzrayim, and the liberation from Egypt is not just an historical rendezvous with the Jewish people and HaKadosh Baruch Hu fulfilling his covenant and liberating the Jews, but it's also demonstrating the futility of pagan idols, of pagan gods, Uvachal Elohei Mitzrayim, all the gods of Egypt, Eseh, Shifatim. Mitzvah Hashem, tomorrow, I'm recording this Erev Pesach, tomorrow Mitzvah Hashem we will recite Birchas Hachama. We don't worship the sun, we don't see the sun as some deified, divine being. The Rambam did believe that the sun and other planets were animate objects possessing cognitive intent and consciousness. Most Rishonim disagree with that, but even if they do, according to the Rambam, they're servants of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's why the sun is referred to as a Shemesh. He meant to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hashem placed them in the Shemayim to direct time and seasons and agriculture, and basically to be the machinery of our cosmos. But each and every Egyptian god, each and every Egyptian idol, whether it was the cattle slaughtered as Korban Pesach or the Nile, which the Egyptians worshipped as the source of their technological prowess, and the frogs, were not just a plague of a nuisance. The frogs were also an opportunity to transform the Nile from a source of life to a source of death, a process which began with the plague of Dam, turning the water into actual death, but which in many ways was punctuated by turning this river Nile, and a flowing river doesn't typically support reptile life, it supports freshwater fish, turns it into the stinking, stagnant pond which reptiles are leaping out of. And in Yechezkel, really the Haftarah of Bo, Makas Svardea is not presented as a nauseating, inconveniencing attack of frogs causing inconvenience and discomfort, but rather the Rabboni Shalom attacking the Nile, which was the source of irrigation. I mean, Egypt is a very unique country in the sub-African continent because of the delta, the Nile Delta, and all the tributaries. So Egypt is able, or at least in theory, should be able to produce a high-powered agricultural society. And they did, and this is evidence, of course, in the end of Sefer Bereshis, when the famine strikes the entire Mesopotamian crescent and Egypt is spared, in part because of Yosef HaTzadik's vision and preparations, but in part because they do have the irrigational methods to support such heavy agriculture. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu literally strikes the Or, and the Or is part of the Egyptian pagan system. Very, very powerful messages and imagery in that section in Yechezkel, the Haftarah Parshas Bo, where Paro is crouching on the Nile like a big alligator or a big reptile, and claiming with great confidence and great bravado, Li Ori, I am the Nile River. And he felt that he was divinely ordained or divinely placed to lead Egypt and to harness his great source of life. So one by one, the Egyptian pagan gods are being humiliated, are being embarrassed. One by one, the Egyptians are recognizing that each and every pagan pursuit is foolish, is preposterous, and in fact, Chazal tell us that the last moment, or the last pagan Egyptian god to be dispelled or debunked was a god, Baal Tzifon, which was the place or the location in the desert where the Egyptians thought they had captured the Jews, trapping them against the sea, wild animals caving in on the Jews on all sides, and the Jews were caught there, and the Egyptians felt, well, even if our previous gods had failed to slaughter the Jews, at least Baal Tzifon, at least this northern god, will defeat them, will triumph, and of course HaKadosh Baruch Hu finally debunked that last god, that last Egyptian belief. So this is not a night for any other being other than HaKadosh Baruch Hu to, so to speak, shine. Ani v'lo shliach, ani v'lo saraf, ani Hashem, not just to rendezvous with Am Yisrael to profess that love, but to demonstrate to the Egyptians, ani Hashem, ani v'lo shliach, ani v'lo saraf. So no one can really occupy the stage. And even Moshe Rabbeinu, who is the great leader, the great liberator, the great redeemer, his courage in challenging Paro, even Moshe Rabbeinu has to give way to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he has to perform miracles, but the mateh, the staff, decentralizes Moshe. It's not Moshe, it's not his charisma, it's not his magic, it's not his power. It's HaKadosh Baruch Hu literally sending these miracles, almost as if you can see the staff and the miracles flowing through the staff. Hine amata zeh shetikach v'yadach. In fact, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives Moshe the mateh, at least the Medrash claims that HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Moshe, if you won't perform my miracles, even a stick, even a twig, afilu makel hazeh, a very diminutive and reductive and diminishing, belittling term, even a twig can perform them, reminding Moshe, and of course not Moshe per se, because Moshe wasn't arrogant or egocentric, but people, they shouldn't become a cult surrounding the personality of Moshe, but see HaKadosh Baruch Hu alone on this night, Ani Hashem v'lo shaliach.